No one really noticed when he first walked in. It was a busy Friday lunch rush at Madeline's Café, on Main. Mothers juggling toddlers, office workers buried in laptops, the clatter of coffee cups and polite jazz looping overhead. Outside, the winter wind pressed gray against the windows, but inside was warmth, chatter, and the smell of cinnamon. Then the bell over the door jingled. The man who entered wasn't part of the rhythm. He didn't belong to the flow of paninis and oat milk lattes. He stood just past the threshold, still as a shadow. His coat was frayed at the cuffs, too thin for the cold. A knit cap, sun-faded and pulled low. His hands raw, something, an old napkin folded into quarters. His face was lean, cheeks hollow, beard peppered with ash and frost. A few heads turned. Most didn't. The barista, Midjan, glanced up. He stepped toward the counter. Slowly. "Ma'am," he said softly, voice like wind through wire. I'm not asking for much. Just, if you've got any bread left over, even a crust." "I haven't eaten," and the manager appeared before he could finish. Young, polished, too smooth. "We don't serve handouts here," he said, loud enough for tables to hear. "Try the shelter 3 blocks down." "I'm not looking for trouble," the man replied, folding the napkin into his pocket. "Just hungry." A group of college kids near the window stifled laughter. One of them raised a phone. "Yo, check this dude. Walked in like it's a soup kitchen. Bet he's got a tent set up behind the hardware store." Another added. The manager stepped closer, now firm. "You need to leave, sir, or I call the cops." The man nodded once. No anger, no plea, just that same quiet hunger in his eyes. He turned, walked out, shoulders heavy, snow collecting on his cap before the door even closed behind him. A little girl, maybe 8, watched from a corner booth. Her cocoa forgotten, eyes wide and confused. Her mother pulled her close, muttering something about not staring. 10 minutes later, the cafe would fall completely silent. 20 minutes later, the whole block would stop and watch him. And by sundown, no one would ever forget the man they'd just turned away. His name was Elias Monroe. He hadn't always looked like that, thin, tired, forgettable. Once, he stood broad-shouldered in a pressed white coat, the kind with his name stitched in cursive thread above the heart. "Chef Elias Monroe," it used to say. Back then, the scent of rosemary and browned butter followed him like a shadow. He used to hum when he cooked something soft, something jazz-hand. His hands were so steady, they could crack an egg perfectly in one motion without breaking the yolk. He cooked for soldiers. That was how most people never knew him. Not in restaurants or cookbooks, but in war zones and disaster tents, where tastes and dignity were often the first casualties. Elias believed every hot meal was a kind of promise. You're still human, you still matter. He'd cooked for Marines, in muddy camps, airmen on broken runways, nurses on their 26th hour. No frills, just food that made men stop shaking. He lost his sense of smell 12 years ago. It was an accident fire in a field kitchen outside Kandahar. Fuel line ruptured. Smoke took more than oxygen. Doctor said he was lucky to be alive. But to Elias, it was worse than death. Without his nose, flavors betrayed him. Timing slipped. The dance was over. So he left the service quietly. Didn't fight for disability. Didn't sue the government. He just faded. He moved to a small town near the coast somewhere. No one knew his name. He lived on retirement checks and odd jobs. Cleaned a school kitchen for a while. Then a gas station. Then nothing. The world moved on. His wife didn't. She left in the quiet way that hurts most bags. Already packed. No argument. Just eyes that said, "You're not him anymore." She took the cat, left the ring on the counter. Since then, Elias had lived in the back of a converted van near the train tracks. Kept it clean, kept it quiet. Read cookbooks like they were Bibles and prayed for warm weather. He never begged. But when the cold came and when the food ran out, he walked into town. He wasn't looking for kindness, just calories, just a crust. What no one knew, what no one ever guessed, was that the napkin he'd folded in his pocket wasn't trash. It was a handwritten recipe. One he'd scribbled from memory. The last one his hands had ever created before the fire took his craft. A little something he'd once made for a group of medics during a sandstorm evacuation. A dish that made a captain cry because it reminded him of his mother's kitchen back in Arkansas. A dish called courage stew, the kind of thing you don't forget. And today, Elias had brought it with him, not to ask for help, but to remember who he once was, even if no one else did. He hadn't planned on going back. After they threw him out, Elias had wandered for a while down along the icy riverwalk, past shuttered storefronts and brittle leaf piles swirling like regrets. His stomach ached with emptiness, but the deeper pain wasn't hunger. It was recognition. The look in their eyes. That silent, automatic dismissal. Not worth the space he's standing in. By dusk, the wind was cutting sharp. Elias was sitting beneath an overpass, trying to fold his thin jacket tighter, when he heard a soft voice behind him. "Sir." He turned. A little girl stood there, cheeks red from cold. In her mittened hand, she held something small and white. "My scarf," she said. "I dropped it, back at the café." Elias blinked, slow. Then he reached into his coat and pulled it out. He hadn't realized he was still holding it. "I figured it might be yours," he said. She smiled and reached for it, but didn't take it right away. She just looked at him, really looked. "Are you okay?" The question landed like a stone. In Stillwater. Elias gave her the scarf. "I've been worse." Before she could say more, her mother's voice called from down the sidewalk. The girl hesitated, then said, "Thank you," and ran off. He should have stayed where he was. Should have found a warm grate to sleep near, waited for morning. But something about the scarf in his hand, about the innocence of that child, her question, it stirred something old in him, a kind of quiet defiance. So he stood up, turned around, and walked back toward the cafe. It was mostly empty now, just a few late diners and a teenager wiping tables. The manager wasn't there, but someone else was. A man in a rumpled tan coat, sipping coffee by the window. Silver hair, thick glasses, military posture even in his seat. He looked up when Elias entered. Their eyes met. "Good Lord," the man said softly. "Is that who I think it is?" Elias raised a brow, cautious. "You're Elias Monroe," the man continued, standing. "You cooked for Bravo Battalion, didn't you? FOB, Orchard Ridge, 2001. Elias gave the faintest nod. "You were there, Corps medic," the man said, shaking his hand. "You saved my sanity. You don't remember me, but I remember your stew. I swear it kept some of us alive." They sat, talked. Quietly. Elias didn't ask for food. Didn't mention earlier, but by the time he left, the man behind the window was on his phone, calling someone. And outside, the snow had stopped. Just for a moment. Like the night was listening. By the next morning, Main Street was a different world. Bright tents lined the sidewalks. Strings of lights crisscrossed above steaming food trucks, and the smell of garlic, sugar, and meat filled the winter air. It was the town's annual Harvest and Hearth Festival, a day where everyone came out to eat, drink, and pretend the year had been kind. Somewhere near the center of it all, the event's headline, chef, a young culinary influencer from New York, with bright teeth and a custom apron, was vomiting into a trash bin behind the main tent. "Food poisoning, oyster tartlets," someone said. Mislabeling on the shipment. By 11 a.m., panic had started to set in. "Who's going to cook for the midday demo?" one organizer asked, pacing in circles. "We've got mayors coming, veterans groups, the whole food press, from the county." Someone mentioned postponing. Another, canceling. But it was a retired school principal named Mrs. Veda Lowell who pointed toward the man sitting quietly on a bench near the stage, old, weathered, a familiar beanie tucked low. "He's the one," she said. "I don't care what the blogs say, he's the real deal." There was silence. Then disbelief. "You mean the guy from the cab video? That homeless man?" Mrs. Lowell frowned. "That's Elias Monroe. He once made bouillabaisse out of combat rations and rainwater. Either give him a pot, or give up." By noon, Elias was standing in the open festival kitchen, apron dusted with flour. His hands trembled slightly at first, more from cold than nerves, but as soon as the onions hit the oil and hissed, everything else disappeared. The crowd gathered, unsure what to expect. He didn't say much, didn't smile for the cameras, just chopped, stirred, seasoned, worked dots. Smells started drifting across the lot, deep, layered things. Browned butter, tarragon, simmering broth with notes of clove and rosemary. People began to quiet. He was making a version of courage stew. A young boy whispered to his mother, "Why does it smell like Thanksgiving and snow at the same time?" One by one, the murmurs faded. By the time he plated the first bowls, the crowd had doubled. Some recorded, some just watched. And when the first spoonfuls were tasted, something remarkable happened. People cried, not big, dramatic sobs, just a glisten in the eyes, a softening in the breath, a kind of remembering of kitchens long gone, of safety, of home. A local reporter muttered under her breath, "This isn't food, this is memory." Backstage, the man who had recognized Elias the night before stood watching with folded arms and a smile. And in the crowd, that little girl, the one with the scarf, clapped harder than anyone. Elias never looked up. He just stirred, steady and slow, letting the heat and the scent speak for him. The moment should have been triumphant. Elias stood in the makeshift kitchen, ladle in hand, steam curling around his face like an old friend. Bowls of stew were disappearing faster than the volunteers could pass them out. Everywhere he looked, people were eating in silence, the good kind, the reverent kind, the kind that happens when food becomes more than food. But behind the row of tasting tables, whispers had begun to grow. Does he even have a food handler's license? Where's the permit for that stock pot? I heard he's been living in a van. How do we know he's clean? The chatter reached the ears of Lisa Hanley, the event director. She approached cautiously, clipboard clutched like a shield. Her voice was clipped, polite but firm. "Mr. Monroe, I need to ask, have you gone through any of our safety orientations or culinary clearance procedures?" Elias didn't flinch. "No, ma'am, I was just filling in." "I understand," she said, "and I mean no offense, but we have county health officials on site. If they see someone cooking without a badge or proper attire," a man's voice cut in behind her, "that badge wouldn't know stock reduction from dishwater." It was Dr. Leonard Rosta, medic from the café, now wearing a fresh coat and a name tag that read Honorary Chair, Veterans Culinary Outreach. He stepped forward. This man fed battalions with nothing but dented cans and grit. "You think he can't handle a rented propane grill?" Lisa hesitated. She wasn't the enemy, just afraid of liability, headlines, consequences. The world had taught her that good intentions could be sued just as fast as mistakes. "I don't doubt his skill," she said, "but we're trying to run a safe event." Elias looked at her, then calm, not angry. "I understand, Miss. If you want me to stop, I will." Before she could respond, a voice rose from the crowd. "He just made my grandfather cry," someone said. A teenager held up a phone showing a live stream. Hashtag Courage Stew was already trending. The video of Elias cooking had been shared over 3,000 times in the last hour. And from somewhere in the back, that little girl shouted, "You said this was a festival about home." He made it feel like home. The tension hung in the air like a pulled wire. One snap from breaking, one breath from softening. Lisa stared at Elias for a long moment. Then she said, quietly, "Finish the batch, and take your time." Elias nodded once. He didn't smile. He just stirred the pot, adjusting the flame by feel. But something had shifted. Not everyone believed yet, but they were listening. It didn't take long for the crash to come. By mid-afternoon, the festival was peaking. News vans showed up. Lines snaked around the block for the stew made by a mystery chef. People began to whisper that Elias Monroe wasn't just some old cookie, was a legend in disguise. That's when the city health inspector arrived. She didn't smile, didn't wait in line, just pushed through the crowd and flashed a badge that said Municipal Health Division, Enforcement. "I need to speak with the person preparing food at this station," she barked. Elias stepped forward. wiping his hands on a clean towel. "Ma'am, you've been cooking for the public for over an hour, without a visible permit, without gloves, without registration. That's a violation of Section 12-6 of County Code." The words didn't sting. Elias had heard worse. But what did sting was the way the whispers changed. How quickly admiration turned to nervous glances. How the same people who had cheered now stepped back, as if the air around him had changed. "Name," she demanded. "Elias Monroe." She typed it into a tablet. Her eyebrows lifted almost immediately. "You've had no active license in 15 years. No address listed. No medical clearance." A man from the event staff appeared beside her, wringing his hands. "We didn't authorize him officially. It was just happened. Sort of. I don't care how it happened." The inspector snapped. "This station is shut down. Now." And just like that, it was over. The flame went out. The spoon stopped moving. The steam dissolved. Elias stepped back as the pot was sealed with plastic and tape. Someone unplugged the burner. A volunteer began stacking unused bowls in silence. The crowd dispersed in polite confusion. No outrage, no protests. Just quiet disappointment, like a balloon slowly deflating, as he turned to leave. He saw her again, the little girl in the scarf. She ran up, holding something in her hands. "I saved this for you," she said. It was a roll, one of the last from the table. Her eyes were wet. He took it, slowly, sat down on the curb as the sky dimmed. He looked at the bread, then at his hands, cracked, burned, still smelling faintly of rosemary. He didn't eat right away, just held it. A single tear broke loose and disappeared into his beard. "You know," he said softly, though no one was near enough to hear, "I only ever wanted to feed people." Far behind him, inside one of the festival tents, Dr. Leonard Ross was having a hushed but heated conversation with a reporter. He held up a worn photo of Elias in uniform, standing beside a massive steel pot, surrounded by cheering soldiers. The caption read, "Operation Winter Hearth, 2003, and in his hand, the doctor held a phone, dialing, because this wasn't over. The envelope came just before sunrise. Elias found it tucked under the wiper blade of his Vano stamp. No return address, just his name scrawled in neat block letters, Monroe. Inside, a printout of a news article from 20 years ago, its edges yellowed with time. Chef of the trenches, the man feeding America's forgotten soldiers. His photo was there, young, proud, ladle in hand, standing beside a makeshift soup line carved into a mountainside. A handwritten note was pasted to the top. "You kept us alive in Kandahar. Time to return the favor." L. Ross Elias stared at it for a long time. Something swelled in his chest. That wasn't pain. Not quite. He didn't realize it yet, but the story was already spreading. That night's live stream from the festival had gone viral. The moment the inspector shut him down had sparked a new kind of fire, not outrage over food safety, but something deeper. Shame, recognition. People watching from their warm kitchens saw not a man breaking rules, but a man being broken by them. By noon, hashtags were trending. Hashtag Courage Stew. Hashtag Feed with Honor. Hashtag Let Elias Cook. A coalition of veterans reposted the footage with their own captions. "He served us. Now let us serve him." Then came the testimonials. One by one, they flooded in. Former Marines, relief workers, trauma nurses. "He made us pancakes out of mashed MREs and rainwater. It tasted like Christmas morning. He stayed up all night to feed families after the tsunami. Said hunger doesn't sleep. He saved more lives with a stockpot than I did with morphine. And with them, receipts, documented missions, field orders, old letters from commanding officers praising the culinary heart of the unit. Some even remembered the name of the dish. Courage Stew, a broth that warmed more than Bodies. By 3 p.m., city officials were in damage control. The festival board issued a formal apology. The health inspector's office released a vague, "we were following standard protocols" statement. But the public didn't care. They weren't just angry that Elias had been shut down. They were angry that a piece of their country's best self had been brushed aside, unrecognized, forgotten. At 4:37 p.m., the mayor's office made an announcement. Due to overwhelming public response, Elias Monroe will be invited back as guest of honor for the closing ceremony of the festival. He will oversee the final dish served citywide, no exceptions. Elias read the message on a borrowed phone. He sat very still. Then, slowly, he reached for his napkin, the one with the handwritten recipe, and smoothed its creases with shaking hands. There were people to feed, and time left to do it. By the time Elias stepped back onto the festival grounds, something had changed. It wasn't just the sunlight, though. It did seem warmer, richer somehow, glinting off the canopies and casting long golden shadows across the brick-lined square. It wasn't the music either, which had softened into something slow and soulful, like it knew not to overpower the moment it was. The people, they didn't avoid his eyes. Now, they sought them. The little girl in the red scarf was the first to notice him. "There he is," she shouted, and suddenly the crowd parted, not in pity, not with awkward claps, but like a parade route. Some folks nodded, some applauded, others just stood quietly, letting him walk through. He wore the same old coat, same hat, same hands, cracked and weathered, but he moved differently. Now shoulders a touch straighter, gaze a little higher. At the center of the square stood a gleaming silver prep table with a fresh white apron folded neatly on top. The event staff had rebuilt the station from scratch, this time with his name on the placard. Closing ceremony, Elias Monroe. Guest chef behind the table stood Lisa Hanley, the event director. She met his eyes, took a breath, and offered her hand. "I owe you more than an apology." Elias shook it. "Just a burner, and a pot'll do." The crowd chuckled. Not a local news anchor approached, mic in hand. "Mr. Monroe, would you like to say a few words before you begin?" He looked at the camera, then the crowd, then said, simply, "No one should have to earn the right to be fed." Silence, then applause. No whoops, no whistles, just honest, grateful clapping. He turned to the table, tied the apron around his waist, lifted the ladle, reached into his coat pocket, and unfolded the napkin, the recipe gently, like handling something sacred. Behind him, a dozen young volunteers, including the little girl, stood ready with vegetables, broth, and fresh-baked bread. He looked to them. "Let's make it count." And they began. The smell rose fast, familiar, inviting, something that cut through politics, class, suspicion, something that reminded people of snow days, sick days, Sundays. Something called courage stew. This time, no one stopped him. The mayor arrived midway through and insisted on stirring. A high school marching band played a soft rendition of "America the Beautiful" off to the side. Dr. Leonard Ross stood quietly in the back, arms crossed, tears in his eyes. And when the first bowl was served, he didn't hand it to a journalist or a VIP. He handed it to the cafe manager, who'd thrown him out. The man stared down at it, ashamed. I didn't know," Elias nodded. "You do now." And just like that, the city's most celebrated meal of the year was served by a man they'd nearly forgotten, but now would never let slip away again. The last light of the festival was softer, now diffused by wood smoke, laughter, and the steam rising from 100 paper bowls, cupped in grateful hands. Elias stood behind the long serving table, his sleeves rolled up, ladle poised over the final pot. Around him, the younger volunteers worked like a well-oiled kitchen team, chopping, plating, passing bread with smiles and sleeves dusted in flour. They didn't ask for direction anymore. They watched him, learned by doing. He didn't bark orders. He didn't need to. He was leading the way people trust when the stakes are real. Lieutenant Harrison, now a firefighter in town, approached with a bowl in hand, eyes misting. "I had your stew in the green zone," he said. "It tasted like home when nothing else did." Elias just nodded and pressed a hand to the man's shoulder. "Glad you're still here." Farther down the table, the little girl in the red scarf was ladling soup with both hands. Her scarf kept slipping, and Elias walked over to gently retie it behind her neck. She grinned up at him. "You're famous now, you know," she said. "I'm just feeding people," he replied. "Fame's for the ones who need to be seen. I'm fine just being felt." Someone behind him let out a soft breath. Lisa Hanley, again this time with a microphone and a shaky voice. "We'd like to end the festival with one final honor," she said to the gathered crowd, a recognition long overdue. She turned toward him. "Mr. Monroe, this town would like to formally reinstate you as a culinary citizen and award you lifetime festival rights anytime you want a flame and a table. It's yours." The crowd applauded. He bowed slightly, but said nothing. Then she stepped forward again, holding something small, a patch, cloth hand, stitched. It was his old field unit insignia, the one lost years ago in the kitchen fire. "We found this in the military archive," she said. "Figured you earned it more than most." He took it gently, thumb tracing the edges. And then something changed, not in his voice, but in the room around him. He turned to face the gathered crowd, not with a speech, but with a request. "I want this stew delivered to the shelter down on 8th. The overnight crew's short-staffed, and I hear they're feeding double tonight." A pause. Then someone in the back said, "We'll drive it." Another voice, "I've got takeout containers in the truck." Within seconds, hands were moving, trays being packed, crates carried. A local bakery donated fresh loaves without being asked. The community mobilized like clockwork, because this was no longer just Elias's voice. It had become theirs. His quiet mission had ignited something larger, something shared. And for the first time in years, Elias didn't feel invisible. He felt heard. By the time the last pot had been scrubbed clean and the final crate of bread loaded into the volunteer van, the square had emptied. Only a few strings of festival lights remained, flickering softly against the night. A gentle breeze stirred candy wrappers and napkins across the bricks, and somewhere in the distance, a saxophone played a slow, off-key lullaby. Elias sat alone on the same bench he had rested on that morning. His apron was folded beside him, hands resting in his lap. No cameras, no applause. Just a fading warmth of a city that had finally remembered what it meant to see someone. Lisa Hanley passed by, coat in hand, clipboard tucked under her arm. She paused, unsure. He smiled gently. "It was a good day." She nodded, then sat beside him. For a long time, neither spoke. Finally, she said, "I was wrong about you, about a lot of things." He didn't answer with words, just looked up at the stars, starting to emerge, one by one, over the rooftops. "You really made that stew from memory?" she asked. He chuckled softly. "Nah, I had help." From his coat pocket, he pulled the napkin creased, stained, but intact. She leaned over and saw the handwritten scrawl. Short, simple, no measurements, just garlic thyme, beef bones. Stir until someone smiles. They both laughed. He handed her the napkin without ceremony. "Hold on to it, in case anyone forgets." "I won't," she said quietly. A car honked down the block. The volunteer van was ready to deliver the food to the shelter. Elias stood up slowly, wincing as his joints reminded him of the cold. He didn't complain, just sipped his coat and slipped his gloves on. "Where are you going now?" Lisa asked. He looked toward the van, then toward the edge of town, where the road curved into the hills. "Not sure," he said. "Maybe I'll check in on the soup kitchen in Hillsboro. I hear their cook retired last month." She smiled. "Do you need a ride?" He shook his head. "I've got a van. Doesn't go fast, but it goes." The little girl in the red scarf ran up one last time, holding out a fresh roll. "For the road," she said. He took it gently, smiled down at her. "You're a good kid, and you're a good cooker." She beamed out with that. Elias walked toward the edge of the square, past the closed café, past a place where no one had looked him in the eye. He paused once, turned around to see the mural of the town behind him, glowing under a street lamp. Then he kept walking, not for fame, not for redemption, but because someone out there was still hungry, and Elias Monroe didn't believe in retiring from feeding people. Some cooks serve kitchens, but the rarest ones, they serve souls, and they never stop. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who's ever been overlooked, because sometimes a warm meal, A second chance, or just being seen, is all it takes to change a life. If you'd like to hear more quiet heroes like Elias, consider subscribing. We tell stories that don't shout, they stay with you.